What's going on, guys? It's Danny from Fantasy Stock Exchange here, and today I'll be riding solo outlining the biggest NFC coaching changes affecting Dynasty Fantasy Football and really going over the three major coaching changes and other small promotions and tweaks, but for the most part, talking the Falcons, Lions, and Eagles, and really overviewing how these moves will impact those teams from a fantasy football landscape. So if you guys are watching this video, you would have already seen Corey really taking on the AFC. Now it's my turn. I'm going to go in, crack the knuckles, talk about the NFC. So overall, I'm going to talk about the schematics of the team. I'm going to talk about the background and really how these coaching changes, especially on the offensive side of the football, really will impact these players from a fantasy football outlook perspective. So if you guys enjoy content like this and are interested in more, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below and turn notifications on to never miss a beat on an FSC upload. Yep, you hit the subscribe button. All right, hit the intro. All right, so we're going to start off with the NFC, and we're going to go to the Atlanta Falcons first. And their big coaching move is hiring Arthur Smith as their new head coach and play caller. So for a little bit of background on Arthur Smith, he is a well-tenured coach in the NFL, working in some capacity as an assistant or higher since 2007, and most notably being the Titans tight ends coach from 2015 to 2018, and their offensive coordinator in 2019 and 20. So when you're actually looking at his tenure in Tennessee, as an offensive coordinator these past 2 years, he's really taken their offense to new heights and rejuvenated the career of Ryan Tannehill in particular, taking them from the 10th highest scoring offensive unit in 2019 and the 4th highest scoring unit in 2020 from where they were in 2018 as being the 6th worst offensive scoring unit, and really helped elevate the play of not only Ryan Tannehill, as I mentioned, but took Derrick Henry to unforeseen heights as possibly the best pure runner in the league in his zone run, heavy play action offense, where it averaged nearly 168.1 rushing yards per game. And as we'll talk about in the schematic section, he really developed A.J. Brown into one of the best yak receivers in the entire league. So not to mention, I mean, despite a heavy wide zone play action approach, the passing offensive efficiency in Tennessee these past 2 years has been remarkable. For quick reference, in 2018 under Marcus Mariota, the Titans only passed for 15 total touchdowns. In the 2 seasons since, with Arthur Smith and Ryan Tannehill running the show for this offense, they totaled 29 and 33 passing scores. So now he enters a situation in Atlanta with an absolutely loaded offense, which includes Matt Ryan, Calvin Ridley, Kyle Pitts, and for now, a disgruntled Julio Jones, and an offensive line in particular that has invested major resources in recent years. The Falcons just needed a fresh face and a leader of men to take over after years of unstable and inconsistent play from the team under Dan Quinn. Arthur Smith has really shown that in Tennessee, he's helped create a tough, physical offensive culture that complemented the philosophy set in by Mike Vrabel. And I don't expect that to waver upon entering Atlanta. So when we're talking about the schematics of the signing, when guesting for an interview on the official Atlanta Falcons YouTube channel, Arthur Smith went in depth talking about the different attributes and strength points that this coaching staff he assembled will bring, how a blend of experience and young creativity will affect them in having a balanced approach, and the allure of bringing in leaders with concise plans really intrigued him as opposed to just yes man that would listen to what he would say. Basically, when he talks about this, he wants other sources. He wants other input in that coaching staff. He doesn't just want to give his call, to give his say, and everybody to just agree with him. He wants that type of culture, that type of adaptation that this coaching staff will bring. So it's good to hear him finally say that. And when talking about in particular, he's really excited about the addition of Dwayne Ledford, a former offensive lineman in the NFL, to really coach up their young offensive line. And he views him as being one of the top line coaches in the country. Again, when we're talking about the Atlanta Falcons, this is a team, again, that has implemented and spent a huge amount of resources to developing that offensive line in recent years. Having a quality offensive line coach that can develop these young talents, in particular Chris Lindstrom and Caleb McGarry just a couple years ago in the first round of the NFL draft, to really set the tone for that offense. So the main focus here, obviously, is going to be that wide zone and heavy play action scheme. And he really wants to optimize in Atlanta. However, although this is the main focus, he directly mentions that there is still diversity of thought, and that although there will be implementations of what he did in Tennessee, he's not just going to print the playbook per se. And he really mentioned that he wanted to be able to adapt freely and accordingly based on the personnel, based off the offense that sees success in Atlanta. So it's really good to see that he's not just honed in on what he did well in Tennessee. He's really going to look at the personnel, look at the roster he has at his hands, at his fingertips, be able to adjust accordingly. So for reference as to what he did at Tennessee, in his last 2 years as offensive coordinator in Tennessee, the team ranked third in run splits in 2020 at about 50.5% and third in 2019 at about 49.5%. When compared to Atlanta, these ranked 66.9 and 62.06, or highest and ninth highest respectively these past 2 years. We should really see a overall balance of the Falcons game plan as a whole. Again, they were a heavy pass team these past couple of years. Bringing in Arthur Smith really adds a different identity, really adds a different physicality to an offense that has quite simply grown vanilla these past couple of years under Quinn. So you guys can see on the screen the two differentiations of the splits, with Tennessee being near the bottom, Atlanta being near the top. However, people are going to hear this on the surface and think it's a huge detriment to Matt Ryan. And although we should see a decrease in volume on the surface, I expect Ryan's efficiency to climb leaps and bounds. And we've just witnessed a similarly talented quarterback to Ryan, with Ryan Tannehill, come off back-to-back top 10 quarterback point per game seasons. In terms of how the passing offense should really operate under Smith with Ryan, look no further than what's been the best part of Ryan's game in recent years: the play action pass. So on the screen right now, you guys can see Ryan Tannehill was by far the league's most efficient play action passing quarterback in 2020. He ranked second in play action dropbacks, second in play action attempts and completions, first in casual and on-target passes, and he was first by a substantial margin in yards, air yards, and intended air yards. So I expect the passing offense as a whole to go down a certain degree, no doubt. Again, Ryan Tannehill only averaged about 30.1 pass attempts per game in comparison to Ryan's 39.1. But really, this should be offset by an increased efficiency of the pass offense as a whole and Smith's adaptation to his personnel around him. Again, he's not going to have a back like Derrick Henry, who commands 409 opportunities. I like Mike Davis. I think he could be a very, very quality back in the system. But Mike Davis is no Derrick Henry. So we got to keep that in mind when projecting volume for this offense looking forward. So again, speaking in terms of a fantasy impact from a schematic standpoint for this hire, the main winners, in my opinion, I mean, you got to take away Mike Davis. They didn't add any backfield competition in the draft. Now you have Arthur Smith, who has shown he can really maximize the output of his running back position and has a run scheme tailor-made around him. Kyle Pitts, because again, Arthur Smith has shown he is the passion and the commitment to developing his young tight ends. And that fourth overall draft capital would suggest that Arthur Smith's going to be extensively trying to get the best out of Pitts. And Matt Ryan, I mean, again, I just mentioned with Ryan Tannehill, Matt Ryan can see that efficiency increase to really buoy his overall production for this team. The main losers of this are going to be the two pass catchers, but let's not look too far into it, considering that Julio's most likely on his way out. So that lack of volume is going to be met with increased efficiency when talking about Calvin Ridley going this year on. However, we're talking about a scheme with Arthur Smith that only really focused on three players in Tennessee, with A.J. Brown, Jonnu Smith, and Derrick Henry. Now, when you're talking about Atlanta, we're looking at a situation where we got Calvin Ridley, we got Mike Davis, we got Kyle Pitts. That doesn't really bode well for the other number three types on the offense with Russell Gage, Olamide Zaccheaus. Maybe we see with the role that Ferkser played for this team in Tennessee, Hurst maybe gets some tertiary looks. But aside from that, the only real fantasy relevant options I'm looking at on this Atlanta offense are going to be the obvious ones, are going to be the Matt Ryans, are going to be the Mike Davises, and are going to be the Calvin Ridleys and Kyle Pitts. So overall, I love this hire from a schematic, from an efficiency standpoint. Just don't expect it to really speak volumes in terms of overall volume in the passing game. So with that being said, we can head on to the next team and talk about the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Philadelphia Eagles made waves this offseason. They fired longtime head coach Doug Peterson, a guy who won them a Super Bowl, a guy who took their offense, took their young quarterback at the time of Carson Wentz to really high, like the highest of high levels. They fired him this offseason. Now they're going on to Nick Sirianni as their head coach with Shane Steichen as their offensive coordinator. So let's talk about the background of the hire with Nick Sirianni. It's really a hire that, to an outside observer, really seemed out of left field. I mean, the Eagles moved from the incumbent Doug Peterson this offseason and opted towards a former Colts assistant as his replacement. There are obvious ties here. Everybody knows that when the Eagles won the Super Bowl in 2017, their offensive coordinator was Frank Reich. Guess where Sirianni comes? He comes from Indy, where he worked under former Eagles offensive coordinator and new Colts head coach Frank Reich. With Sirianni, you get a level of adaptation and understanding to the Eagles that they really haven't seen from Doug Peterson since that Super Bowl stint. And Doug Peterson these recent years has been one that's been ridiculed by Carson Wentz prior to his trade to Indy and other vocal leaders on that Eagles team these past few years. So it was never going to work out with Doug Peterson. So bringing in a fresh face, a fresh leader in Sirianni will really help this team in terms of overall morale, get back to where they want to be. Sirianni has shown that he's been able to both maximize the level of output and put his offensive playmakers in the best position to succeed. While he's still largely unproven, Sirianni has shown to adapt his offenses around him in the past while learning under his head coach in Frank Reich. They've adapted around Andrew Luck, Jacoby Brissett, and Phillip Rivers as three separate starting quarterbacks in the past 3 years for this team. So even if he's not the most effective right away as a schematic crafter, given the lack of experience, he's there to bring this team back together and really get them to care about each other again. He's a youthful and energetic coach who brings in a youthful and energetic coaching staff that should really help the team feel connected and unified once again. So anyways, we talked about the background. Let's get into the schematics. He's coming from Reich's tutelage. It's widely believed that Sirianni will adopt a similar offensive philosophy to that of which Reich instituted in Indy, one that included a healthy dose of the run game, where they were fourth in attempts in each of the last 2 years, and really helped to pave the way for Marlon Mack and then Jonathan Taylor as successful fantasy football lead back. So in terms of opportunity these past couple years, we see Jonathan Taylor's 52.9% opportunity share in 2020, 25th highest in the NFL, and Marlon Mack's 62.9% in 2019, which was 17th highest in the NFL, comparatively to what Miles Sanders actually had last year at 76.3%, sixth in the NFL. The common stigma that everybody and their mother has around Miles Sanders is, oh, well, the coaches have limited his overall opportunity. This narrative is simply not true. In addition to the sixth highest opportunity share, Sanders had a 77% snap share, third highest in the NFL, and 0.77 fantasy points per opportunity, 85th in the NFL, and 216 opportunities or 18% per game would really tell another story as to this underutilized back that people want to push. So for those who may argue the low red zone usage that we saw from Sanders this past year and automatically point to overall positive regression in both the short yardage and the touchdown categories, we're still talking about an Eagles team that should absolutely struggle in 2021. They have the fourth lowest Vegas win total at 6.5 wins and have a struggling offense. So you guys can see that on the screen. Their odds this upcoming year are not really something to be excited about. So the problem that I have with Sanders in particular for 2020 wasn't really the coaching. It was the failure of a consistent offensive pressure and success. Again, this Eagles offense was the 8th lowest yards per game, 7th lowest points per game, 7th lowest run play percentage, 9th lowest total run plays at 403, despite 115 combined quarterback carries, 630 quarterback rushing yards, and 8 total quarterback rushing touchdowns. So while Sirianni should really help balance out the offensive output between the pass and the run, the Eagles still figure to be a struggling team in terms of NFL success, which resultantly will continue to naturally lower the rush output floor we can expect from the offense. And combining this with the implementation of Jalen Hurts really bodes poorly for Miles Sanders. So When you combine all this with the added competition of Kerryon Johnson in particular, it really makes it difficult to see sustained RB1 upside for Sanders, who will have to make up all this lost value on the ground game in the receiving game. And as I'll go into, I mean, the Colts were one of the best teams at incorporating their running backs in the passing game this past year at 114 backfield completions and 134 targets, or a 24.3 backfield target market share in 2020. We can attribute a lot of this, however, to the style of offense Reich and Sirianni really adopted around Phillip Rivers, who's been a notoriously high distributor to his backfield. And this past season was a substantial increase from the 2019 campaign that saw them earn 91 total backfield targets and a 17.7% backfield opportunity share. In comparison to the Eagles and their 97 backfield targets and 16.2% target market share, this should stay relatively similar. The only thing, though, is that with the presence of Jalen Hurts in this offense, both of those actually went down substantially less because he threw the ball 16 total times to his running backs, 148 passing attempts, or at a sub 11% clip. We've mentioned Sanders really in depth. Now let's really look at the impact of other Eagles offensive players. So with the addition of a very versatile and open-minded Sirianni, I believe Hurts really has a fine chance of building upon a successful 2020 fantasy football showing. Let's not talk about real life. He wasn't a good NFL passer. Can we stop arguing that? He was good in fantasy football. In Dynasty, again, you guys saw my Dynasty buys and sells video. I'm absolutely not touching him due to the uncertainties around his job security at current ADP. However, if we're talking redraft, I'm fine with taking Hurts any day as a late round quarterback, a high upside quarterback too in Superflex formats, because we've seen the recent success of Konami code quarterbacks in fantasy football. And while he presents a ton of risk, few quarterbacks ooze the rushing upside of Hurts. So for reference, in his 4 games started last year, Hurts averaged nearly 12 rushing attempts and had 272 rushing yards in that stretch on a bad Eagles team that really has no motivation to rely on Hurts' longevity, given the assets they loaded themselves with to make a splash for an upgrade this upcoming offseason. On a bad Eagles team that has really no motivation to rely on Hurts from a longevity standpoint, they can just let the wheels go off on this guy, let him have full reign of the offense in 2020, and just move on from him, or 2021, and just let him move on from him from 2022 and on. So in terms of other ancillary weapons on this offense, talking about the pass catchers, the only ones I really put stock into are Dallas Goedert and Devonta Smith, with one being their leader in receiving yards per game, and now gets the supervision of Sirianni, who comes from an indie team that prided themselves on incorporating their tight ends in the passing offense. And the other being a 10th overall pick this past year, who is arguably the most developed wide receiver in this entire class. So aside from those two, I'm avoiding this Eagles passing offense as a whole. This can be a low volume unit on what should be a poor offense. And that's not a recipe for dependable fantasy reliance. So overall, I don't mind getting the Eagles pass catchers and Hurts at value. Talking about Sanders, he's going too high for my liking. And any other weapons on this offense, I'll just say no thank you. So we can go on to the next team. That's going to be the Detroit Lions and Mr. Kneecap Biter himself, Dan Campbell, being hired as head coach, and Anthony Lynn being his offensive coordinator. So y'all know how much I love tone setters. Dan Campbell came into Detroit and immediately set the tone at his first presser. All things aside, Dan Campbell was brought in to really gather and motivate a sunken Detroit Lions team after the tenure of Matt Patricia, and has already made a splash in filling his leader of men role for this team. With Campbell, we're getting experience and grit with extensive history around NFL football, 10 years of experience as a blocking tight end in the NFL, and 10 years of extensive coaching experience since then, including a brief interim job in 2015 for Miami. His most recent gig on New Orleans between 2016 and 2020 had him as their assistant head coach and tight ends coach, and helped him develop a culture and structure of discipline and execution under Sean Payton. While it remains to be seen how exactly his schematics will translate from New Orleans, considering Sean Payton was the one that really called the plays throughout his tenure, one thing is for clear. Dan Campbell is there to motivate and teach rather than be the heavy schematic play caller for Detroit. Speaking of that, though, in comes Anthony Lynn as the team's new offense coordinator, recently off a 4-year tenure as the head coach of the LA Chargers, and he enters as the most likely play caller and runner of this Detroit offense. So let's break down exactly what Anthony Lynn can do for this offense and why DeAndre Swift is really set for ascension with the pairing of these two running the offense. So in terms of schematics, let's go narrative, all right? This is a former NFL running back. We've seen Anthony Lynn love getting his playmakers the ball in space out of the backfield. And we've seen in recent years with Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler that he's had capable backs able to fill this role for him. So you guys can see on the screen between 2020 or 2017, 2020, he's really had his backs involved in this offense. So in 2020, Austin Eckler, if you remove that game that he left early, and even if you remove the game that Tyrod Taylor only gave him one target, talking about the Justin Herbert pace, he averaged 7.1 targets per game in games that he started and finished, and 7.9 targets per game if you take away that Tyrod game. So we're looking at a guy who had nearly 22 opportunities per game when he was at full health in 2020. In 2019, there was 18 opportunities per game for Melvin Gordon and 15 opportunities per game with 108 targets for Austin Eckler. In 2018, it was Gordon at 20.1 opportunities per game, Austin Eckler at 11.4, and Justin Jackson at 5.3. And in 2017, we saw Melvin Gordon average 23 opportunities per game. It is clear that Lynn is intent on getting the ball to his backs over his tenure in LA, and seeing Campbell's former spot in New Orleans and their efficient usage of a banger and scat back similar to the 2018 Chargers really suggests that both Williams and Swift can both be relevant pieces to this offense. And as you guys can see on the screen, Anthony Lynn has said it himself that he views Jamal Williams as his classic A-back thumper, while DeAndre Swift is more of a scat back guy that can work in space. So when we're really talking about that, based on that quote alone, we could absolutely see that Williams could most likely get that between the tackles and goal line work, while the third down duties are given to DeAndre, similar to what we saw from a Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler situation. Though I do think that the touches are more going to sway towards Swift, given the fact that Williams isn't as good as Melvin Gordon, and Swift is arguably a better pure runner than Austin Eckler. So when we're talking about it, the rest of this offense, Lynn really walks into a unique situation where he doesn't have a Keenan Allen guy who can run his slot and be his alpha true dominant wide receiver. Closest thing he has is actually tight end TJ Hawkinson. So as you guys can see on the screen, TJ Hawkinson in 2020 ranked second on the team in targets with 101, second on the team in receptions at 67, and second with touchdowns at 6. And led this team in red zone targets at 17, which ranked 6th in the entire NFL. So when we're talking about TJ Hawkinson, most of this production actually only came in line because he only spent about 39.7% of his snaps in the slot. With the departure of nearly 300 vacated outside targets, with the coaching addition of Campbell in particular, since Lynn had Allen running his slot in LA, we saw that the New Orleans Saints actually deployed Jared Cook in the slot on 56.2% of his total snaps, which was actually the 10th highest rate in the entire NFL. When talking about how this might translate to TJ Hawkinson, I expect that full role expansion. And when we're talking about a guy with already proven production who gets a bump with the vacated targets on the team and could possibly see more usage in the slot, I wouldn't be shocked if we're talking about Hawkinson really entering that elite of the elite amongst the tight end position in terms of fantasy football usability. So wheels up for TJ Hawkinson. This is going to be that absolute builder off his breakout season this past year. And apart from those three guys, really from a redraft perspective, I'd steer clear from the rest of the Detroit offense. Again, this is still going to be a team who has one of the lowest ceiling offenses in the entire NFL and has the second lowest over-under total in terms of NFL wins, according to Vegas, at 5, only ahead of the Houston Texans. So let's really get on to the next few teams, and we're not going to go as in depth because we're only talking about minor coaching changes as opposed to the head coaching position, but we can talk about the Minnesota Vikings. That's going to be hiring Clint Kubiak as their new offensive coordinator with the recent retiring of his actual father in Gary Kubiak. So if we're talking about the Vikings in 2020, Kirk Cousins led the league with 248 dropbacks and 226 of his 519 total passing attempts, coming with 2 tight ends on the field. And with the departure of Kyle Rudolph and no real substitution, we could probably see Clint Kubiak adapt to this personnel change and really give more 11 personnel sets to really complement what the Vikings moves have indicated to us this offseason. However, even with the personnel additions, given the strength of their offense and plan in the past, I really expect Kubiak to really maintain this basis of Gary's 12 personnel heavy play action offense, which bodes well for the superstars already on this team and have showed out. And as I've mentioned with Irv Smith breakout, there are 62 vacated targets that really leads him to an opportunity to establish himself as a top 10 fantasy football tight end this upcoming year. And we saw it last year. He really came on at the end of the season. I wouldn't expect anything different under Clint Kubiak. So overall, while I'd expect a slight influx, the Vikings should really just stick to their bread and butter and go with what's worked for them in the past. So let's talk about the Seattle Seahawks. And they hired Shane Waldron as their new offensive coordinator, who was actually an assistant on the LA Rams this past year. So let's talk about Shane Waldron getting hired as the new offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. And this is one that is really intriguing on the surface, because when he actually got brought in, the first quote that came out of Shane Waldron's mouth was that he wants an ideal balance and he wants to be able to run more successfully than they were last year. For reference, Seattle actually rushed the ball the 14th fewest times in the NFL. And he wants to really parlay that into a play action passing attack down the field. And this is no different to what we really saw with LA. I mean, LA was able to run the ball, work that play action passing game. And if you're a Seattle Seahawks fan, this is really intriguing to hear, considering the fact that 2020 was just the Russ Hero Ball show. He was just scrambling, doing whatever he could, throwing the ball down the field to those two receivers, and really flamed out the second half of the year. Having a more concise and strict game plan under Waldron can really help the overall efficiency of this offense. And honestly, consistency in this offense, which is what they've lacked for these past few years. And as you guys can see on the screen right now, McVay actually talks about Waldron's effect on the Rams, mentioning in particular his great communication skills and ability to really connect with the guys. And this is huge when you're talking about a dysfunctional Seahawks offense this past 8 games in 2020. Having a guy that can really connect and learn about the personnel around him can really help this team stay consistent throughout the year. So let's get on to their NFC West counterpart. The big news for this team in particular this offseason was losing Robert Saleh and Mike Lafleur to the New York Jets, who Corey mentioned in the head coaching, was losing Robert Saleh and Mike Lafleur to the Jets, which Corey mentioned the AFC side of this. But when you're actually talking about the 49ers side of this, they hired Mike McDaniel to really take that Mike Lafleur role as their offensive coordinator. And there's not really a lot of talk around this because Kyle Shanahan will still be calling plays, but McDaniel really take over that departed Mike Lafleur role. And this is his official promotion from run game coordinator to offensive coordinator. Shanahan will still call plays, but McDaniel will really learn and help Shanahan maintain one of those most unique and creative offenses in the league. So I don't really expect many changes from the 49ers offense, and they should still be a really efficient and play action based team going into 2021. So with that being said, if you guys made it this far in the video, currently at around 32, 33 minutes, make sure you leave that big old thumbs up. It really helps us in terms of the YouTube algorithm. So anyways, if you guys made it this far, hopefully you enjoyed, and stay tuned for this week. Stay tuned for the upcoming offseason because we're coming at you every single day with that quality content. As always, peace out, y'all.